We're, what, 4 days since the verdict. It is no surprise. Donald Trump and his allies have had a lot to say since the conviction. What has stood out to you the most? Has anything surprised you?
The fact that they like to cite how much money they got from the conviction and...
Okay, that can't possibly surprise you. If you don't think that was completely preordained to line up those donors to manufacture a positive headline, if you don't think that's the case, I got a bridge to sell you, brother.
Well, the second part of that is they obviously like to cite the numbers that work for them, but they don't like to cite the numbers that don't. And the polls that came out in the wake of this conviction have all been bad, and they know it, and they just pretend like it doesn't exist. And I thought there'd be some pushback, and they'd try and spin it. They're not even trying to touch it. And I think that is indicative of how bad they see them. They're not talking about the Reuters Ipsos poll, which there was a headline to pull from that they could have pulled on, which was 90% of Republicans still support Donald Trump. They didn't even touch it. And I think that's indicative of how fearful they are that the country is now against Trump.
Because they know 90% of Republicans are not enough to win him the election. Charles, is there any case the Supreme Court grants Trump his wish, steps in here and annuls this thing?
There's not a universe in the entire multiverse where this happens, Stephanie. Not at all. I don't think that Donald...
You're such a nerd. There's not a universe in the entire multiverse.
Absolutely. I don't think that Donald Trump... this is just an unserious request. It's an unserious remark simply because this is just not the way that government works on any level whatsoever. And so the notion that the Supreme Court would take an interest in and then somehow nullify the verdict that was created in a state trial is just unheard of. So this is going nowhere, and it's going there fast.
But he is going to annul this thing. Can you walk us through how that works, what it looks like? I mean, excuse me, not annul, appeal.
He's going to appeal it, but he's going to appeal it at the state level. He's going to try to find some sort of issue that took place at the trial, whether it's the instructions by the judge, the gag order, something, if not all things, and create an appeal and try to put that before the Court of Appeals so that he can stay off or stave off whatever sentence Judge Marchand ultimately imposes upon him next month, in July, next month.
Yamiche, is it safe to say that this is yet another loyalty test for everyone in Trump's Republican Party, especially those who want to be considered for the VP slot?
It certainly looks that way, especially when you think about the VP contenders. They're lining up to really trumpet and echo the language of Donald Trump, which is saying falsely and wrongly that this was all a conspiracy theory carried out by President Biden, that this is a rigged criminal justice system. It's really interesting, of course, to see Republicans talk about the rule of law, talk about their respect for the justice system and their respect for America, while also, of course, attacking this verdict. And they aren't attacking the jury per se. They are attacking Judge Marchand and saying that it's his instructions that were the reason why this conviction happened. But what's clear here is that the Republican Party, if you're someone who wants to have a political future, at least in this iteration of the Republican Party, it seems as though it behooves you to get behind Donald Trump and to really continue to trumpet his words. I will say it's also interesting, of course, as we talk about the Republicans, to see the president come out tonight, President Biden come out tonight and say, and really just get more and more aggressive with the way that he's talking about this. He had, of course, shied away from talking about this, but just tonight he's saying that Donald Trump looks like somebody who had snapped after the 2020 election and he just can't let it go, and that it's driving him crazy, and that this is also the reason why he's talking about all these conspiracy theories, including, by the way, saying at one point that Biden and Democrats were trying to assassinate him when they were doing the classified documents case down in Florida. So it's really, in some ways, just interesting to see this. It's not surprising to your point, but it is interesting to see you have the President Biden really starting to get forceful on this, and then you have, of course, the Republicans are just falling in line with Donald Trump as per usual.
It's interesting. It's a Monday. It's interesting, but it's distressing when you think of the lies that are getting pushed, or you think about the level of anger and the threats, because they have real consequences, right? We know a week ago, Michael Fanone's mother was swatted. Michael Cohen's family was doxxed after the verdict. How much worse is this environment going to get, Hugo, between now and November? You heard Trump there. I don't think the American people will stand for it. Come on now.
I think it's a real problem, not least because the pattern and practice of how his supporters respond, and we're not even talking about January 6th, we're talking about the last 6 to 12 months of what happens when Trump even makes inflammatory statements about the judges in the case, jurors in the case. All it takes is one person, one supporter to act out in political violence, and then we have this road to a very dangerous and kind of problematic situation. And Trump knows this, and his advisors know this, but they still encourage it because, it placates him, it makes him feel better that he can rail on social media. But they know as well, full well, that all it takes is one person to actually act on that death threat to Judge Chutkan, for instance, in the January 6th.
But it shows that Trump has ultimate loyalty from at least some Americans, and he can say, I didn't give them direct instructions to do so.
Yeah, his argument is, it's a heckler's veto. I can say whatever I want. If someone acts on it, it's not my fault. Mm-hmm. But he knows, and he knew since January 6th, because we have kind of the discussion around January 6th about how he knows if he does something and if he encourages people to go to the Capitol, for instance, they will go to the Capitol. And they will go to the
Capitol. And today they are sitting in jail. Charles, our friend Peter Baker points out that if Trump wins in November, he will have survived 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, civil judgments for sexual abuse and fraud, plus a felony conviction. So how can anyone believe that there would be any meaningful guardrails on Donald Trump this time around?
I think that that's a valuable question, an important one. And I think that the notion of there being no guardrails around Donald Trump is exactly why we have to get engaged right now with respect to the ones that exist within the system, i.e., who are we sending to Congress? Who is going to enforce the notion of checks and balances with respect to what the president tries to do? We already know that the Supreme Court's not going to do it. We have that. It's very clear. They are essentially and effectively in his back pocket. The concern about Project 2025, for example, and all of the things that we have already heard about what Donald Trump and his agenda is going into a potential second term should be an alarm to all of us, because at this point, it doesn't seem that absent the legislature doing something about it, that there are going to be any guardrails. And this is a real concern because the judiciary has told us and shown us in so many different ways that they're not going to be the ones to actually hold the president in check.
Yamiche, while most, and I'm going to say most, Republican Senate candidates were loudly defensive of Trump, we saw their counterparts, Democratic candidates, a lot more muted because they think they're going to need crossover voters to win in November. What do you think of that approach?
It's an interesting approach, and it really just underscores the times that we're living in. I mean, as you go and look at the polls, you see that most independents do believe that this verdict was correct. But it also tells you that there are a lot of candidates out there that are maybe really looking at the American people and looking, frankly, at some of the Republicans that maybe are disgruntled with Donald Trump and saying, well, we should be able to try to just try to convince them to come over to our side almost by any means necessary, which means in that regard, not talking about this verdict, not really sort of challenging the sort of echoing that we're hearing in the Republican Party. But it also tells you that we're living in a time where I think you think of the fact that this is a jury verdict. This is a verdict that in a way that in some ways is operating in our American legal system, that you would imagine that candidates would be able to say, yes, I respect the verdicts. But when you see that it's being muted, it really just tells you, I think, the worry there that speaking out against this verdict and speaking out in a way that sort of makes people uncomfortable, that is possibly going to cost people their races. So it really, I think, just tells us that that's the times that we're living in. And if I could, really quickly, you asked Hugo about sort of, could this get worse in the danger? When you think about Michael Cohen's family getting doxxed, and you think about Michael Fanone's family being swatted, there's also the idea that these jurors, they're out there, I'm sure, very nervous. You think about Stormy Daniels saying that she was intimidated when she was on the stand. I also just want to underscore that when we think about sort of how candidates are talking about this, how both parties are talking about this, there are also 12 people who put their lives on the line, frankly, when you think about sort of the political violence that we've seen in this country, who were brave enough to be part of this trial. I think about them when we think about sort of where this is going next.
Charles, let's talk about a new topic. Hunter Biden's gun charges trial began today in Delaware. Jury seated. This thing's about to roll tomorrow. What do you expect?
It's going to be interesting. The prosecution is basing their case on circumstantial evidence. They don't have the actual evidence of proving that Hunter Biden had actual cocaine. They haven't sent anything to a lab. They have basically indicia of drug paraphernalia. And what their case is based on is basically saying that two things. Number one, you lied about the fact that you were either addicted to or using illegal drugs when you purchased the firearm. That's the first sort of two charges. Then the second one is you were in possession of a firearm around the time that you were either addicted to or using controlled substances. So a lot of their cases based on circumstantial evidence. I don't expect the political circus that we saw here in New York with respect to people showing up and sort of saying that this is somehow Biden controlling the justice system. Obviously, it's not. You have a Trump-appointed prosecutor. So this is not going to be what we saw there, but it is going to be a very interesting case for the government to move forward with. And it should be noted that even as this is a Trump-appointed prosecutor, this is not the type of case that feds typically prosecute absent a violent act to go with it. So you usually don't see these types of cases prosecuted if someone has not done something violent that would have triggered this. So if there's been any political prosecution as compared to what we saw in Manhattan, it's this one.
I realize this sounds incredibly naive, but given what Charles just laid out, right, this is a Trump-appointed prosecutor. President Biden allowed this to happen. Shouldn't this put an end to the argument that Trump and his allies are pushing, that President Biden has his thumb on the justice system, everything is super political? If it was, he would not be allowing his only living son to be sitting for this trial. Shouldn't this, in theory, end that argument?
Or even when the Biden Justice Department went and prosecuted Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat in Congress, a Democrat in the Senate, when it's a 50-50 Senate. I mean, there are so many examples of this Justice Department making objective prosecuting decisions all the way through. And frankly, in the Trump cases, the evidence is so overwhelming that it would be egregious not to prosecute them. So that's the Trump cases. But in this instance, you know, to your point, for the Biden Justice Department to go after the president's son in a criminal matter, and remember, this is not the only case. We also have the tax case
in September.
So there's two cases actually against the president's son. And I think that is indicative of kind of how even-handed this Justice Department has operated.